Central Church, how you doing today? Doing good? You sound like you're doing okay. But you look like you're doing great. There you go, Darlene. Darlene's in it. Hey, I'm super excited to be speaking today. We are continuing our Moment series that Pastor Paul started last week. This was actually an idea that I had for a conference a few months ago. And then we ended up going with Vessels, and I thought that was so fun, and it was great. And Pastor Paul, he said we should make this into a sermon series after conference. And so we're talking about moments with God, right? How do we steward them? What do we do when we have a moment with God, which I think is so important, especially the weeks after such a big week like conference, where most people that were here, hopefully everybody, had some sort of moment with God. I remember when I was younger, when I was in youth and going to these conferences, and we had these big youth conferences and youth camps, and we used to call it post-camp syndrome or post-conference syndrome, because you'd come back just on fire for God. And then that high would wear off in a few weeks, and some of the kids that weren't as serious about God, they would just go back to their normal life. And I always wondered, what that was. What happened? You had such a powerful moment with God at this conference, and then a few weeks later, I would just feel like it would wear off. The feeling would wear off. And I think that is worth talking about, especially after conference, because chances are you had a moment with God 2 weeks ago at conference. Maybe you had a moment with God recently, and it might be disorienting when the feeling wears off. You might wonder, did I even have a moment at all? Was the moment real? Did it actually happen? Did I really hear God if I don't feel like I felt in that moment? And I just want to start off with this, that our feelings cannot be the gauge for moments with God. We cannot gauge these moments with God based off of how we feel, because every single time, there's no statistic, there's no some of the times, it's every single time the feeling will wear off. But moments with God, they're real. The feeling will go away in a few weeks. And you might wonder, did I even really hear God? But God really spoke to you, and God really met you, and God really had a moment with you. And if you know that, and if you know that moments with God don't just happen at conference or at a youth camp, they don't just happen once a year. Moments with God are available to you every single day. And that's where the change is. That's where the power is. That's where real life with God is. We're not conference Christians. We're not camp Christians. We want to be every day, every hour, every second Christians, people that follow Jesus at every moment, amen? And I've just been wondering, as I was preparing for my message today, I keep asking myself, how many moments with God do we miss on a daily basis? And this might not be very significant to you, and it may not seem like a big deal, but that could be because even the idea of a moment with God may have become so casual to us. The idea of having an encounter with God has maybe it's become so normal that we've lost the amazement towards it. And we've become so casual about these moments with God. Is it possible that we may have experienced or seen so much that we've become desensitized to the wonder of a moment with God? Are we so chronically distracted that God has faded into the background of our lives, and the only time that we remember him is on a good Sunday or at a conference? And he's just this background character in the story of our lives. Maybe we've become disillusioned living in a world where anything imaginable by the human mind can be created into a movie, into a TV show, CGI and AI. There's all these crazy things that we can see, and we've seen some crazy things that humans can create, but in reality, the human mind and human imagination has a limit. There's only so much that we can imagine, and we don't even have the ability to comprehend that we are being held by a God that's so vast, so big, so powerful, so mighty. And because we've seen all these Marvel movies where the superheroes always win, we see God through that filter of, well, I've kind of seen this before. No, you haven't. God is so much bigger than that. God is so much greater than that, than anything you have experienced. At any service, at any conference, at any camp, at any big moment that you've seen, God is so much bigger than that. But maybe we've put him in a box because we've seen it all, because we think that we've seen it all. And I came to this realization that even when I do think about God, a lot of times, just in my daily life, when I do think about him, when I stop to think about him, I think a lot about what he has done. What he's done for me, for my family, for my friends, what he's done in my life. I remember, and I think that that's powerful. I think it's good. I think remembrance is powerful. Gratitude is necessary. We sang a song called Gratitude today. I think it's a beautiful thing for us as people of God to take a moment and remember what he has done, right? That's powerful. I can look back 2 weeks ago at what happened at conference, and it's a powerful thing for me to remember that moment and detach myself from that feeling and just remember that God did something great, right? Remembering is powerful. And I've been thinking about this, and I just realized, like I just said, there's so much more to God. And I think if I think long enough about what I've been through and how far God has brought me, I become overwhelmed. I kind of get emotional if I think too much about it. But I realize that for all that God has done in my life, that doesn't even begin to fully summarize all that God is. Like I can take a moment and I can think about everything that I've seen God do. I've seen him do miracles. I've seen actual healings with my own eyes. I've seen some crazy things. I've seen God at work in crazy ways. And all of my experience up until this moment doesn't even begin to fully summarize all that God is. I have only seen but a glimpse of who he really is. I've only had moments with him. I can think for a long time, and it doesn't even it is a grain of sand. My experience is a grain of sand compared to all that God is. There's so much more to God than we have seen. There's so much more to God that we can even understand, more than we can even imagine. And there will come a day where we'll be freed from the limit of our imagination and our understanding. We will stand in awe and wonder of his magnificent glory, which will far surpass anything we ever saw on this side of heaven. We will be face to face, and it'll be so much greater than anything we ever experienced on this earth. There is so much more to God. So much more to God. Until that day that I meet him, until that day that I get to heaven, I want to live every day taking the opportunity that I have before me to have a moment with him, because it's available in every moment. I don't want to wait the rest of my life to have a moment with God. I want to be aware of him today, and that's what I'm talking about today is being aware of God in these moments that we have with him every day, not just at a conference, not just at a camp, not just at a powerful service. It can be at any moment that I can be aware of God. I want to learn to be more aware so I don't miss another moment with him. I want to be aware. I just told the worship team before they came out here, we usually pray in the room back there before the worship team comes on stage. And I said, there's no pressure to fabricate a moment with God. Because the worship team also came off this high 2 weeks ago about what happened in this room. And I said, don't feel pressured to fabricate a moment. Just be aware of God. That's your job today. You don't have to create a moment. The moment is in you being aware of God. And as I was thinking about all of these things, and I came across the story of Moses and the burning bush, which is a very popular moment in the Bible. And we're going to read it really quick. Exodus 3. It's going to be up on the screens. One day Moses was tending the flock of his father-in-law, Jethro, the priest of Midian. He led the flock far into the wilderness and came into Sinai. Sorry, I lost my place on my screen. It came to Sinai, the mountain of God. There the angel of the Lord appeared to him in a blazing fire from the middle of a bush. Moses stared in amazement. Though the bush was engulfed in flames, it didn't burn up. This is amazing, Moses said to himself. Why isn't that bush burning up? I must go see it. I must go see it. When the Lord saw Moses coming to take a closer look, God called to him from the middle of the bush. Moses, Moses. Here I am, Moses replied. Do not come any closer, the Lord warned. Take off your sandals, for you are standing on holy ground. And I was reading this passage, and I was just, first of all, the thing that stuck out to me was that Moses was just doing his job. He was having an ordinary day. He wasn't at church. He was tending to his sheep, to his father-in-law's sheep. He was up in the mountain, walking around. He saw something that looked interesting, and he said, I must go see it. He became aware that there was something different here. He stopped what he was doing. Other versions or other translations said that he said, I must turn aside. He made a decision to turn aside and walk towards this burning bush. And I can only imagine what Moses felt in this moment, an ordinary day of work interrupted by the very presence of God. He was witnessing something miraculous, yes, but he chose to pay attention. So let's talk about this gesture of Moses removing his sandals. As I was diving into the story a few months ago, I found two reasons why this is significant, why this gesture was significant, and how it's relevant to us today. And I think the first significance is pretty obvious. If you've read the Old Testament, especially Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, the first few books of the Bible, you learn how much goes into having contact with God. There's a process for everything. Like there was a process to make a sacrifice to God. And it wasn't something to be taken lightly. There was something specific every time to gain access to his presence. Like the altars in the book of Genesis that were built with very specific materials and specific instructions to offer very specific types of animals to God. And like the tabernacle in Exodus, that was the portable dwelling place of the presence of God, where he gave specific dimensions and even structures within the tabernacle, and God gave very specific measurements for everything. Go back and read Exodus and read God's instructions for the tabernacle. I mean, it sounds like the instructions your wife would give you sometimes. It was just so detailed and specific, and my wife's glaring at me over there. I'm just kidding. It was a joke. It was a preacher joke. Don't get mad. But it was so specific. There's so many details. It wasn't random. It wasn't like I just woke up today, I'm gonna build God a tabernacle. No, there was a very specific instructions for it. There was a process. For the temple that Solomon built where God dwelled in the Holy of Holies, which was the innermost room of the temple where only the high priest could enter once a year. There was all these processes. Part of the process to enter these places where the presence of God dwelled was for the priests to wash their hands and their feet. And some scholars consider that removing shoes before entering these holy places, it signifies putting off the earthly or profane upon approaching the holy. So it wasn't just something that they did, that they took their shoes off because they wanted to be comfy. It meant something. It was them symbolizing, demonstrating that they are getting rid of something that is dirty, that they've been walking in. Remember, they're up in mountains. They're out in farm ranges. They're out in fields. Their feet are dirty. Their sandals are dirty, and they're entering this very holy place that's very specific, that's very, very detailed, and they have to take their shoes off because it signifies that they are getting rid of the unclean so that they can approach the holy, the sacred, the presence of God. So Moses is in this moment where God asks him to remove his shoes in the presence of God, and it's an act of reverence, a gesture of getting rid of the unclean in order to stand on the ground where God's holy presence rested. So what are we talking about here? Because how does this apply to us in 2023? I am not saying to take your shoes off in church. Well, that's gross. I'm very glad we don't have to do that anymore. Everybody keep your shoes on, please. There's some people that do. I'm not going to judge you, but it's kind of weird. You don't have to do that anymore. Now, I'm not saying you have to take your shoes off. My favorite college professor used to say, Jesus is the thesis. And that was his way of teaching us to find Jesus in everything. If you're reading the Bible and you're in the Old Testament, find Jesus. If you're reading a leadership book, Jesus is the thesis. Find Jesus in that leadership book. If you're having a conversation with a friend, Jesus is the thesis. Find Jesus in that conversation. And if you can't find, he'd say, if you can't find Jesus, is it worth consuming? But in everything that you read and everything that you watch and everything that you listen to, find Jesus. So I'm reading this story. I'm like, okay, how does this, because this is how he taught me, how does this point to Jesus? And if you read, sometimes the Old Testament can feel irrelevant because we think that it no longer applies to us. But if you change your perspective, you can see that everything points to Jesus and what he did for us. And if you look closely, you'll find that there are many parallels between Moses and Jesus. In many ways, much like a lot of the Old Testament, Moses is a foreshadowing of Jesus. Most importantly, in the context of this moment where he's with the burning bush, a few verses after what we just read, God calls Moses to lead the people of Israel from Egypt to freedom. Hundreds of years later, Jesus comes during a time that all Hebrew baby boys were ordered to be killed out of fear that there was a Savior coming, which is exactly what happened to Moses. Moses came during a time where Pharaoh ordered for all Hebrew baby boys to be killed. Hundreds of years later, Jesus comes along, and it's the same thing. Moses, who was chosen by God to lead Israel out of captivity, had to rid himself of something that represented uncleanliness in order to stand in the holy presence of God. Jesus, who was given by God to be the Savior of the entire world, took all sin, all of our iniquities, all of our deficiencies unto himself in order for all of us to stand in the holy presence of God. This moment with Moses, where God is calling him to be the one to set the Israelites free from the Egyptians, foreshadows Jesus coming, taking on sin, taking on the unclean, becoming sin himself, hanging on the cross, pouring his all out so that you and I can have access to the presence of God. Moses was chosen for him to have access to the presence of God. Jesus was sent so that you and I could have access to the presence of God. But it remains the same in both ways. There is something that we have to kill. There is something that we have to get rid of. There is something that we have to let go of. There is something that we need to release in our lives when we're in the presence of God. The difference is, before it was about access, now it's just about awareness. Because of what Jesus did for us, for you and for me on the cross, we don't have to earn the access. We just have to be aware that God is there, that his presence is with us so that we can be with him, so that we can have a moment with God. Amen? So what man used to have to do externally to have access to God, we now do internally to have awareness of God. We all have things that we carry, that we hold, that we're not letting go of. There are things that keep us distracted from his presence. Maybe it's pride. Maybe it's bitterness. Maybe it's busyness, guilty. All these things will make us feel and even believe that God is distant, but he's not. He's closer than the skin on our bones. He's closer than the air that we breathe. He's the closest. He's the closest. He's near. He's always near. But these things that we hold, these sandals that we keep on our feet, they'll make us feel like he's not there. They'll make us feel like he's far away. They'll distract us from his presence. So the point today is that it's time to just let go of those things. It's time to just let go of those things so that we can become more aware of the presence of God. We have to release, we have to let go of, lay down, even for just a moment, anything that may take our attention away. There's this quote from a book that Isaiah actually lent me that I've been reading the last couple of weeks. And I started reading this book. I've kind of had my message for my idea for a couple of months. Isaiah gave me this book And there's a chapter in this book where it talks about, it's a leadership book, Christian leadership book, but the whole chapter is about Moses and the burning bush. So I'm reading this, I'm like, all right, cool. God's giving me more ideas. And I read this quote. It's called Strengthening the Soul of Your Leadership. The book is called Strengthening the Soul of Your Leadership. But I read this quote that it was just kind of like a jab to my side when I read this. Many of us are choosing to live lives that do not set us up to pay attention, to notice those places where God is at work, and to ask ourselves what these things mean. We long for a word from the Lord, but somehow we have been suckered into believing that the pace we keep is what life requires. We slide inexorably into a way of life that offers little or no opportunity for paying attention, and then wonder why we are not hearing from God when we need God most. That last line is the one that was like, okay. Here's what's funny is that I was texting Isaiah, I'm telling him, dude, like this book, it's gonna be great for my message, blah, blah, blah. And I'm like thinking like, there's all these things that are happening. God's clearly speaking to me about my message. It's like, no, dude, he's trying to tell you something about your life. Like he's trying to send you a warning, like, hello, pay attention to me. I'm like thinking, I'm still thinking about work during this. I'm like, oh, this is sick. I'm gonna use this for my message. Thanks, God. Thanks for sending Isaiah to give me this book so that I could see this quote, so that I could use it for my message. And God's like, no, dude, Isaiah gave you that book because he knows that you've been in a hurry, because you need to pay more attention to God, because you need to be more aware of his presence, because you've been in a hurry. We were out at lunch a few days after he gave me the book, and I had started reading it, and it's just a few guys that we were at lunch, and I'm telling him, like, this book is great. I don't know what. And Isaiah's like, yeah, man, I'm glad I gave it to you. You got that hurried soul. And I thought about it for the rest of the day. I was like, this guy's really just calling me out at lunch like that. But it was exactly what I needed to hear, and it kind of brought me back to earth and made me realize, like, I'm preaching this not because I've mastered this, but because I'm learning this, because I'm in the middle of it, because I'm trying to figure it out too, because it's important. It's so important for us to be aware of these moments with God. We could miss a lifetime of moments with God, of seeing aspects and characteristics of him, not because he's unavailable, but simply because we're just not aware. God is never unavailable. We're just not aware. When we say or sing or pray, we want more of you, God, right? Have you ever sang that song before? We want more of you, God. I feel like I've sang that song 1,000 times. We're not implying that God is withholding of himself from us. Jesus was the living, breathing, tangible proof that God gave all of himself to us. What we're really saying is, God, we want to be more aware of you. When we sing, God, I want more of you, we're not saying, God, give me more of you because you haven't given me your all. He already gave you his all. What we're really saying, what we really mean is, God, help me be more aware of you in this moment right here, right now. I want to be more aware of your presence, because I know that you've already given your all to me, and right here, right now, I just need to be more aware. And that's the journey that God invites us to seek him in the morning, in the evening, to seek him when we feel it, seek him when we don't, to seek him when we're winning and seek him when we're losing, to seek him in every moment of every day, to seek him so that we can find him, so that we can know him a little better. So our issue is never his absence. It's our awareness. There's no work to be done to gain access to the presence of God, but there is work to be done to gain awareness of his presence. There is nothing else that you need to do to gain access to God. That's a game changer for somebody in the room that's been running away from God, that's been trying to work their way to God. You don't need to do anything else to access the presence of God. You just have to do something. Usually it requires you letting go of something to become aware of the presence of God. That's all. That's ball is on our court for the presence of God. It's what we do. Jesus did his part. We now have to lay down the things that distract us, the things that may keep us too busy. We need to lay down our pride of thinking that we don't need God, of thinking that we can do it on our own, of thinking that, well, if I really need God, God will just show up whenever I really need him. Or we just wait until the right time, in the right moment, or we just wait until the next conference, or we just wait until they play the right song, or we just wait until the message is just that good that I come to Jesus. But no. His presence is available every single day. When you wake up, it's there. When you go to sleep, it's there. Where you go every day, it's there. You can have a moment with God in your car. You can have a moment with God in your shower. You can have a moment with God in your living room. You can have a moment with God here at church, yes. But it's not limited to this place. His presence doesn't have that limit. His presence doesn't have that limit like we do, where we can only be in one place at one time. So anywhere we are, if we are aware of God's presence, who knows what can happen? Who knows what can happen? Who knows what can happen when we become just more aware of him, more aware of his presence? There's this other quote that I stumbled upon a few months ago that I loved, and I put it in my notes. I think this might have been like last year, and I just kept it because I liked it, but I was looking through my notes and I found it, and I said, this fits perfectly too. We Western people, it's not gonna be on the screens, but I have it here. We Western people are goal-oriented consumers, and we can't imagine doing anything that won't get us something. But with full deliberation, we need to understand our exploration is not an effort to get anywhere. My starting point is that we're already there. We cannot attain the presence of God because we're already totally in the presence of God. What's absent is awareness. Little do we realize that God is maintaining us in existence with every breath we take. As we take another breath, it means that God is choosing us now and now and now and now and so on and so forth. As you're breathing, God is choosing you. You're already totally in the presence of God. You're already totally in the presence of God. The only thing that you're missing is awareness. The second significance that I found with Moses removing his shoes, and the band can come back up. He removed his shoes in the presence of God. It occurred to me when I was reading Exodus 3 a few months ago, and I thought to myself, the first thing I do when I get home is go straight to my closet and take my shoes off. That's the first thing I do when I get home, is I remove my shoes. And so I put myself in Moses' shoes. That's not a pun. I was reading this, and I was like, I'm gonna put myself in Moses' shoes. Byron liked that one right there. He appreciates a good pun. It wasn't a pun though. And I looked through Moses' journey and wondered what effect all of this had on him. Before he had this moment with God, with the burning bush, he was born Hebrew, and he was supposed to be killed as a baby, like I said, but was adopted by Pharaoh's daughter. And then he grew up in an Egyptian palace. He grew up as a prince. Have you seen The Prince of Egypt? I just watched it this week in preparation for this message. There could be miracles if you believe. It's a good movie. But he grew up in the Egyptian palace as a prince. And then the Hebrews end up rejecting him in Exodus 2:14 for trying to save a Hebrew slave from an Egyptian. And then Pharaoh tries to have him killed for killing an Egyptian that was beating on a Hebrew slave in Exodus 2:15. So the chapter before, he's being rejected by everybody. He didn't really belong anywhere. He grew up in a palace that was never really his. And his own people were enslaved. The people that were enslaved, that were his own people, were the ones that were building this empire that he benefited from. And then he has to leave. He eventually flees to Midian and marries a Midianite woman. And then in Exodus 2:22, Moses names their son Gershom. When he explains why he chose that name, he says, I have been a foreigner in a foreign land. That's what he named his son. I have been a foreigner in a foreign land. And now here he is. Moses, the foreigner, the alien, was never known a true home, probably unsure of who he really is. His identity is a little shaky. He doesn't really know where he belongs. He's now in the presence of the God of his ancestors. This isn't like any of the 2,000 Egyptian gods that he probably grew up learning about, because he grew up Egyptian. An ancient Egyptian culture, they had thousands of gods. Now he's having this moment with the one true God, the God that tells him to remove his sandals, not just to symbolize reverence and not just to symbolize that he was releasing something that was unclean so that he could step into the holy, so that he could step into the sacred, but it also symbolized that he was finally where he belonged. His whole life, just trying to find that place, being rejected by his own, not really knowing who his own were. He's in the presence of God now, and he says, remove your shoes, for this is holy ground. So he has to release something. He has to let go of the unclean, but I wonder if Moses thought, is this home? Is this where I finally belong? And God says, I am the God of your father. I am the God of Abraham. I am the God of Isaac, and I am the God of Jacob. He introduces himself to Moses, his real God. Introduces himself to Moses. Said, I am your God. I am the God of your ancestors. And basically said, this is where you have belonged all along, in my presence. How would your life change if you had this realization that in the presence of God is where you've belonged all the time? No. Like think about it. How would your life change if you actually started living like you belong in the presence of God? If you just got rid of this striving, if you got rid of like, I gotta work for his presence, I gotta work for his love, I gotta work. No, what would your life look like if you finally just accepted that in his presence is where you were created to be? And there's nothing that you need to do to access it. And in every day, all you have to do is just become aware of it. What would your life look like? How would your life change? How would your marriage change? How would your body change? How would your business change? How would it all change if you finally accepted and embraced? There's no other place that I belong than the presence of God. There's no other place that I belong than the presence of God. If you finally realize that while you were out running around, hurrying, trying to fulfill your life with everything else, that there was a place that you could come to where you would find everything that you have ever needed. I'm telling you right now, we have to find a way to slow down. I have to find a way to slow down and become aware of his presence in my everyday. We have to. That's our invitation today, to become more aware. I got to go home last weekend to my hometown with my wife, and we were having lunch with my parents. And my dad's talking to us, and when I was a kid, I used to beg him to come to church with us. And I think eventually we wore him down. At some point, he came to church, he got saved, but he's never really been a spiritual man. He's never really been all the way in it. He goes to church on Sundays, but he hasn't always been aware of the presence of God, I don't think. And we're sitting at their table, and my dad just starts opening up. Another thing that I never thought I would see, my dad opening up to us about his feelings and what he's been going through. And he's just talking about how he's been kind of going through it, and he's been struggling a little bit, and this and that, and you know, businesses and what it used to be like. And he said this. He said, I think God's trying to get my attention. I think God's trying to get my attention. Words that I never thought I would hear from my father. I think God's trying to get my attention. He said, the only place where you will find peace and where you will find your joy is in the presence of God. He looked at us, right? He said that. He said the only place that you will find that is with God. And I finally realized that. And I thought to myself, I don't want to wait another 25 years to learn that. I want to learn that right now. I want to take his word for it and know that it's in the presence of God where I've always belonged. I don't want to leave that place. I don't want to go anywhere else. I don't want to look for him in other places. I want to be in the presence of God every moment of every day, because I don't need the access. I already have it. I just have to be aware. I just have to be aware of his presence, that it's with me. It's in me. I carry it. I no longer have to run to a temple. I am the temple. My body, my soul, my heart is where the presence of God now dwells. And so anywhere that I go, He comes with me. And He's telling me this during, I think, one of the busiest times of my life, where I feel like I'm rushing, where I feel like I'm in a hurry, and I'm like, okay, I get it. This wasn't just for the message. This was for me. And if this was for you too, if you find yourself in that same place, would you just stand up? I want to pray for you really quick. If you feel like, man, I've been in a hurry and I just need to be more aware of His presence. I've been striving. I haven't been really running to God. Here's the thing, this is for all of us. Doesn't matter what your life looks like right now, what your situation looks like. We belong in the presence of God. And I want to ask you this, what other place like the presence of God? What other place has this freedom? What other place has this joy? What other place has this peace? What other place has the healing for you and for your family? What other place has redemption and healing? What other place has this? What other place can you find everything? There is no other place on earth. You can look and you can search and you will find that there is no other place like the presence of God. What a beautiful thing it is that the place where you will always find everything you need is the place that you were created to be. Better is one day in His courts and 1,000 elsewhere. So I don't know about you, but I want to live every day aware of His presence. I don't want to let moments pass me by, and I don't want to run by these moments with God. I want to learn how to slow down and have a moment with Him. Would you lift your hands so I can pray for you? God, we come before you today and we thank you because your presence is guaranteed to us because of what you did on the cross, Jesus, because you gave your all to us. Lord, today we get to stand in your presence fully free, fully redeemed, knowing that all we have to do is be aware. Open our eyes, Lord. Open our eyes to the burning bushes around us, to the miracles that are around us, Lord. Lord, don't let these moments, don't teach us to not let these moments pass us by in everyday life where we get to just be with you, sit with you, learn from you, and learn you, Lord, not to gain anything, God, not to get anything out of it, Lord, but to just be with you and be aware of you, God. Thank you for your presence, Lord.